For spending time with us this afternoon that I know. Thanks for coming back. I love to see familiar faces and names, but I also like making new friends. So thanks so much in advance for your time. I know it's one of the most valuable commodities we have in life. So make it worthwhile. We're going to talk about SASE. And like Tony said, Zero Trust was already something that we presented on, and we're kind of backing up into a broader spectrum, broader topic. And Arun was right on in saying that ZT is part of the SASE infrastructure. We're going to make sure that you understand how that works. I just wanted to kind of put that out there as well. We're going to touch on both topics with obviously a main focus on secure access, a service edge, and what it means and why you should care. We're going to talk about the model, how it came together, how it came to be. Little brief history. Like anything else, you can't really, you got to learn from the past. You got to look at the history and where it came from, where it's going. That relationship I mentioned between SASE and Zero Trust, very important. Some use cases. This is the way I learn, is real world sharing of ideas and concepts and problems we've helped solve for other customers, and just good back and forth dialogue. I'm hoping to get a lot of Q&A at the end of this. So remember what Tony said about the Q&A at the end there. Feel free to put them in there and our moderators will grab those and throw them at me. And then some missteps, what not to do. I can't tell you all the things to avoid, but I can tell you some of the obvious ones we've seen over time. So learn from other people's mistakes would be the basic concept there. So good presentations. I always start off with a good quote. It helps relate to what we're going to be talking about. This one from Stephen King is sooner or later, everything old is new again. Points for those who remember what book it came from. But it's very common to see themes repeat, and SASE isn't brand new. The concept of it isn't new. Some of you may be able to relate to the like old school IT cybersecurity days in the beginning, where everything was delivered through a terminal, right? I certainly remember those days. And it was a more consistent experience, but it was a simpler experience too, right? So it was being served to you from a main construct, in this case, a mainframe of some kind. And then it grew from there, and we got away from that concept, and now we're coming back to it again. But now the mainframe is going to be the internet, where services are being provided and we're plugging into those things, hopefully with a better, faster experience. But there's some pitfalls: security, control, administration, visibility, reporting, all that fun stuff. We're going to talk about these things. So kind of a Simon Sinek fan. I don't read everything, but he's got a couple interesting concepts. And starting with the why is a great question he asks. It's a powerful one. I don't think he invented this concept, but we want to start off with this today. And if you can answer yes to the following question as to why we're talking about this concept, then you're in the right place. Kind of like when you go to college first day, say you're in the right room if you're here to learn about X, Y, or Z. So ours is going to be securely delivering our users to the things they need to do their job, right? And those include applications, files, directories, data. That's going to become the main thing that we talk about, that I hit on quite a bit. So we want to deliver them to those things. And in this case, services mainly is how we're trying to get them to that. What are the services involved in delivering them? Inspecting that traffic, making sure that they are who they say they are, and validating that before they access our most sensitive, intellectual property or whatever it may be. So that's what we're here to talk about. You're in the right place if you want to get the answer to why we want to do that, or how in this case, by the end of it. So what's it all for, right? Well, there's one thing that I repeat, and I have done so now for many years. The title of my book will be, I don't know, based on the following statement. None of us here is IT cybersecurity experts, okay? We are all data protection specialists, and we are all in different degrees here to protect the data. If you take away the data, we have no reason to get out of bed in the morning. I think a number of you have heard me say this before, and I stand true to it. And that's what it's all about. It's your value, your brand, your reputation. It's pretty much everything, right? It's the most valuable thing we as IT people protect. The data, keeping that in mind. That's what this is all about, right? At the end of the day, secure, the first S in SASE is all about security, securely delivering you to those things, including data that you need to do your job. Great statistic here. There's been a 40% or so increase in the last several years in organizations wanting to know more about and or adopting components or portions of Secure Access Service Edge, Which brings me to my first kind of clarification statement is SASE isn't a thing you can buy. It's like, oh, I'm going to go buy some SASE now. I think most of you understand that. It's conceptual. It's a platform. It's a methodology. It's an approach. Fill in that word that you want to use, and it's components of various things that you may or may not want all of those ingredients in that soup, or some of them, or maybe you do want all of them. And we're gonna talk briefly about all of those that go into that. And I'm open in the Q&A to learning more about what other things you would consider to be put into the SASE methodology or approach, and we can kind of have a little back and forth on it. But you're going to find out that it's more than just one thing. Further clarifying the why, behind that are drivers. What's driving this mad dash to understand SASE and jump in the SASE pool and get to know it? And what are some of the benefits? We all are struggling now with remote workers, maybe not so much now as we did this time last year. One of the silver linings of the pandemic did force us to get creative quickly with remote workers and the security that had to follow them and wherever they went. And perhaps, like as usual, security maybe lagged behind a bit, and now we're catching up. So remote workers are pushing a lot of this. I need it now. I need it when I want it on the device that I'm using, no matter what time of day it is. We're an instant on off society now, and services and the work that we want to do, we need to be able to do it when we want, where we want, with the device that we want to use it from. And so that's a lot of what's driving it here as well. But along with that, there's some complexity concerns and challenges we're going to have. So we're going to try to simplify things again and make it easy, just like the mainframe days. It was simple. Or simpler. A lot of data breaches. I won't pound on that one too much. We all get the news and we all see what's going on. No stopping that right now. And then higher agility at lower cost. We get better bang for the buck. My IT dollars need to go further than they used to before. The final one is understanding that it used to be, we knew where the edge of our network was. We could go physically touch it, look at it, and go, that's where my network ends and the rest of the world begins. And as time went on, it changed. It drifted. It went into the cloud. Now it's starting to go to the remote endpoints. And it's finally now hit a wall, or at least as far as we know, where we, human beings, are now the new edge. It's being based on what we do or don't do and the level of risk we expose our network and its data, applications and such through our actions, maliciously or otherwise. So we are the last edge, and we have to make right decisions. We need technologies, however, to protect us from ourselves sometimes, from doing lazy things, silly things that are against policy, or we forgot that it was policy. So how is that going to follow us in the SASE model, right? How does that get imposed if we truly are the last bit of the edge of the network? And there are ways to do that and bring that along for the ride, and you'll see that there. So like I said, history. Let's learn a little bit from what we knew in the past and how this has evolved. And that'll give you maybe a glimpse in your own personal environments, because everybody's are going to be different, where it may be going for you. So in the beginning, we had things like network as a service. And that came along pretty early. It's been around for a long time. You can call a carrier. You can design a software-defined wide area network with various vendors. Sit down at a keyboard and virtually draw out and design and diagram and bring life into your wide area network through SD-WAN. You can optimize it with certain technologies, make it faster, but without increasing the amount of money you pay to your carrier. There's ways to do bandwidth, increased bandwidth optimization. And then also to work on aggregation or aggregation points for that network itself, where it's connected, who's connected to it, all those things. These are things that have been around for a while. There's nothing novel or brand new here. Around the same time or shortly thereafter, we said, hey, now that we've got this network as a service, we need to add security stuff to it. So the security components individually started popping up. Some of these more sooner than others, but we have these now and more. This is just to kind of get the creative process going. Web gateways, IDS, IPS, firewalls, and a couple others. You notice I have an asterisk next to ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Architecture. That's because we're going to talk a little bit more about it here in a slide or two, and it's a different topic. I do have some presentations out there you can find that we've done on ZTNA. I also have a white paper out there as well that we can share, but it's almost as big as the SASE concept. So when we join all these, which has happened more recently, we have to include things like threat detection across these network connections in the cloud, providing data security along for the ride. Now that we're putting more and more data out in these cloud-based services and service providers, the data exists almost everywhere. Okay, so how do we protect that data? Know where it is, how old, where the old stuff is, the duplicate data, the oversharing of information. Do we allow our users to create shares and share it with people outside the organization, or even additional people within the organization or partners, and so on and so forth? So it becomes this web, and it grows very quickly if we don't contain it or have ways to monitor that from a data security perspective. And when you mix all these ingredients together, you get now the secure access service edge, which can do all of these things, or potentially all of these things. You don't need to do them all, but they're there if you want to turn them on or enable them as a service. I'm not going to mention vendors today. Vendor names, there's going to be a lot of them here. And what you can do, and it is sponsored by Checkpoint. It is definitely something they do. A lot of these things, about 80% of what you're seeing on the screen here, Checkpoint does for sure. Keep that in mind. But it's even bigger than one vendor. They're a lion's share, but you're going to have to add in some other ingredients along the way as well if you want to get into all these things. So where does that leave us today? So that was history. Let's clean that up a little bit. We still have users, of course. They're the new edge, and they're working from everywhere. I mean, there's really no limitation as to where they want to work or can work these days. Okay, that's a given, and we've gone and let the horses out of the barn, so to speak, last year, and they're never coming back for some of us. Tony was mentioning never coming back to the office before the meeting, and we aren't either at CBI. We're done. So with that in mind, how do we still provide that level of expected performance and availability and security to all of our web apps, traditional applications that may actually reside in our data centers, the data they need to get to, and email services and such? Well, we put Secure Access Service Edge in the middle, and we can start connecting them with the various components that I talked about. And there's a few more here that come along for the ride. Generally, it starts off with, do you want to design or get into designing an SD-WAN? Do you want the advantages that come along with that? Not the only one, and it's not always the first one, but it's one of those things that if you're going to do it in the next year to 3 years, you probably should start architecting a plan now, because it becomes more painful and retrofitting it down the road and more costly. And then everything else becomes kind of a layered piece in any prioritized fashion that you almost want to do it in, because these things come along as services. Once you connect the users on the left with the things on the right through an SD-WAN or some kind of cloud services model, you've got all the pieces you need to start adding other things on as a service, or as much as you can. I'm a big proponent of services-based delivery, because at the end of my presentation, I'll make a bold statement, and I want to see someone push back or agree, disagree, or whatever it is. But I'm going to talk about the future of services, and just to kind of test the waters with a smart group of people here. So threat detection, CASB, DLP, DNS, you can see all these things. Everything is a service now. Flip it on, it just works. But is it secure? We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. All right. I told you I'd get back to zero trust network architecture because I had the asterisk, and how it fits into this. It's worth a slide to go over very quickly, and to kind of go over the actual concept of ZTNA, and then you'll see how it kind of folds together. So if SASE is the road, you're building connection points from the users for whatever device they have to the thing they need to do their job. You still need the gatekeepers and security. And the first one they're going to run into, or should, is a validation of their identity. They are who they say they are. The device is the device they normally use at the right location at the right time of day, and a whole bunch of other attributes, right? Like kind of like Big Brother, but we want to kind of fingerprint them a little bit, or at least enough to know, okay, you are really who you say you are. Okay, we're going to go the extra mile and check your machine. Is it configured properly to my specifications? Maybe there's 10 things we need to check on all these machines before we let anything connect to our network. So we're not trusting anything, hence the name Zero Trust, of course. But we're looking at identity verification. Is it configured properly? Like I said, doing network level inspection, the type of traffic, where they're coming from. Is it a safe place they're connecting from? For example, you wouldn't want to enable or allow a laptop that is dual homed and is running in a public area, maybe an airport perhaps, and is also trying to connect to your network, regardless of if they really are who they say they are. For some reason, dual homing has been turned on, and that literally is a conduit between the airport's wireless and anything else sitting around them and your network. So little things like that, they happen. It's not as often, but I'm giving one example of many. And then compare that against a behavioral baseline. And this is all still zero trust stuff here, but it's worth noting. Is the behavior normal based on a profile that maybe we can develop over time? You know, Dan never connects to our network in California at 2 a.m. from, you know, Madagascar, you know, extreme example, but, you know, those types of things should stick out. And even the subtle things should stick out. But that zero trust becomes gatekeeper to your SASE roadwork that you've laid down, and it's persistent. It's constantly checking. It's not a one and done like we're used to with a VPN connection in the old days. You install a VPN client, you log in once with and you establish a tunnel that's secure, supposedly. The tunnel itself anyway is encrypted. And then you're done. You're not challenged anymore. I want to launch that app. I want to RDP into that server. I want to get my hands on some data, perhaps that maybe I shouldn't be looking at. You're validated over and over and over again constantly with this zero trust concept. And if you have a man in the middle attack or someone has stolen your credentials and you look normal at first, but then later on you start not looking normal and doing things you normally don't do, you need zero trust to validate that consistently. And it's something we're seeing more and more of. It's just something good to think about. Don't build a SASE infrastructure without also thinking about how zero trust plugs into that same construct. Okay. I like to reinforce zero trust whenever I can. It's good medicine. Okay. Let's do pros and cons. Lots of good stuff here, right? We're talking about high scalability, and it is just that. So whenever you go to services-based model, we're talking about, and by the way, I love to talk about the financial benefits, return on investment, return on security investment. Rossi, if you want to go down that road, we've been doing that for a long time. But that's a different conversation offline about the value prop from a financial perspective, how you have to go at your IT budget and when you ask for money differently for operational expenses versus the physical, more like the capital expenditures of equipment that can be, you know, traditionally amortized and depreciated over time. This is all services stuff, or mostly now services. That's the other shift. So you have to think of it as you would, you know, paying your utility bill. Okay, it's a service. So, but it's highly scalable. Definitely right out of the box, you're going to get an infinite amount of scalability, as much as you want or as much as you pay for. Or there's portions of SASE that will scale up and down weekly, monthly, daily, hourly, sometimes, depending on your utilization or the thickness or the amount of lanes in the freeway that your SASE road has laid down for you. It can dynamically change. So scalability becomes, you have a lot more flexibility. It's like going from tight jeans to very, very loose sweatpants, as some of us can relate to from last year. It just expands as much as you need it to. Quickly deployed, yes, it's a service. I don't want to say it's easy or it's simple. We can do that in a weekend, because I was on that side of the desk for a long time. And whenever I heard someone say that, I would roll my eyes and go, yeah, you don't know my world. I've got a lot of things going on and variables you don't understand. But it is quicker, relatively speaking, than in deploying firewalls, deploying IPS IDS, deploying a wireless app, web application firewalls that are designed to optimize network traffic. I mean, all these are physical things. The logistics alone take longer than it traditionally would take to enable these services. So it's quicker to market, to actually get this up and running. There's lower maintenance, generally speaking, not lower administrative maintenance. That's still there. You still need to maintain these things administratively. That doesn't go away. But low maintenance in the fact that you're trusting another organization to do the general maintenance. It's up and running. There's a guaranteed level of service with an SLA. So you don't have to worry about those things that you normally would, because these are generally services you're using to connect you to the internet and your applications and data.
Dan, we do have a private chat question for you.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Can we interrupt you for a second?
Stop paying attention to that. Sorry, I got on a roll.
No, that's fine. I wish I have the question, the chat question, private chat question was, I wish I have an unlimited budget, but we don't. Yeah. Can you recommend more of a phase, like a cost-conscious approach that prioritizes most impactful components of SASE? Is there such as? kind of a phase?
Yeah. And I'm not going to be political and say, well, it depends because I don't know your network and your environment. I'll give a few assumptive responses. Also know that it wouldn't hurt that if we got together afterwards and we could talk about it a little bit more. But, and you know what? I'm going to break for 1 second out of this and go back to this as a reference because I'm going to use this as part of my response. Great question. So looking at all these components, generally, like I said, a good place to start is if you are in a position and you have multiple locations and your network is already fairly complex and you get some legacy equipment in there, maybe one or two different firewall vendors, one or two vendors for IPS or proxy, and it's just kind of a mishmash. If you fall into that category, which I'm saying it because most organizations have a little bit of that spaghetti going on, now would be a great time to consider simplifying that and investing in an SD-WAN type of approach. It's going to give you the kind of a bang for the buck where it's going to simplify, give you the scalability. There's an easy point of entry. The learning curve is pretty low. And then you can start stacking stuff on top of it fairly easily. If for whatever reason that doesn't appeal or work for you, then I would start off and backtrack downstream a little bit to a zero trust network architecture. That's going to be needed more sooner than later anyway. And it's generally cheaper, or cost effective, I should say, to implement the components of zero trust than the SASE stuff, which comes later and generally costs a little bit more. If you already have some of these things, like, yeah, we already have an internal on-prem DLP infrastructure, start by calling the vendors whose solutions you already have here listed in the cloud in the middle and ask them, what's their SASE roadmap look like? What does it look like to transition what I currently have and what I've invested in you? And can you give me in my next renewal, can you give me options to get your cloud-based or SASE-based version of your product? A lot of them do. DLP stopped being a thing in 2019 when Gartner stopped really using the phrase. You can't find a Gartner Magic Quadrant anymore beyond 2019 for DLP because they killed it when they started introducing SASE, which is the new modern DLP. So I'd start there. You probably already have some components you can easily start to transition over. And then ZTNA, never too soon to start looking at that. The white paper I have out there will help you kind of go through what components are there. You'll find some really cheap, lower cost items in there. So great question, but required a little bit more of a visual response.
May I say a couple of things? First of all, Dan, this is great stuff, right? And I always try to participate so that whatever I'm listening to sinks into my brain. So far, what I got from what you're saying, and please feel free to correct me because I want to make sure I understand this excellent info. First thing is, I think SASE is about mitigating business transformation risk, especially in this distributed era. That's the premise I'm assuming. But the three, I could say, fundamental things that I think I got from what you said so far is that first, it's about convergence and consolidation and simplicity because you're actually converging networking and security functions. Security is naturally higher because you can control and protect anything anywhere. And then scalability, talked about that. With that backdrop, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, if you execute a SASE strategy carefully, you would gain benefits such as moving access control closer to the origin or where it's needed, reducing complexity, making the business more agile, right? Simplifying deployment, management, and policy enforcement. And then, just seamless anytime, anywhere authorized access. Sound about right? Did I miss anything?
No, it's great. The next one of these, I'm making a note. I'm going to co-present with Arun next time. No, that was great. No, you did a great job. You consolidated all that beautifully. So yeah, that's good cliff notes for everybody right there. If you're recording that, that's fantastic. No, I would totally agree with everything you said, Arun.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. So you can see the list goes on and on for pros, right? A lot of people ask me about the elimination of VPN, right? So it's a VPN killer. It can be. Traditionally, we're evolving. DLP is changing, just like mobile access management, mobile device management. That changed and morphed for years after it first came out, and it's a natural progression. So VPNs are changing now, where you can deploy a secure access service edge model that includes things like SD-WAN and some others, where you could conceivably take off the VPN agent off those machines and get rid of your VPN concentrators or wherever they may be in your data centers, because there's costs, there's maintenance, there's upkeep and everything else associated with those. And they would seamlessly connect and be validated to the things they need to do their job, because you now own everything down to that endpoint. And you have visibility 24/7, no matter where they are physically. So they just fire up their machine, they click on an icon. It's an application that requires internet access. It goes to call on that service or whatever it is, especially if you have a single sign-on login page or landing page. Makes it easy for the user just to click on buttons. And the SASE model, the cloud-based SD-WAN, will say, oh, I need to route you from where you're at to that application, and I'm going to connect you and then get out of the way. It's the VPN equivalent, because all the traffic is then actually encrypted from end to end. So it's a different way of solving the same problem, basically. And it's a more seamless experience for the user, because I know we all love firing up that VPN and logging in, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. Some of us suffer through that. Reduce physical data center costs, of course. You could potentially do that if you wanted. We talked about not renewing leases on physical buildings because we're all working remote. Same thing's happening with data centers. Why do we want to be? And I'm going to stop myself for a second. I've interviewed thousands of companies in my days. I've been here for 20 years at CBI, in the industry for 30 years. And I love asking the following question after they tell me what they do. It's like, well, tell me about your company. What do you make? What services do you provide? What's valuable to you? And I'm talking to generally the IT teams, the security side of the fence. And I have yet to hear someone volunteer and say, we want to be the world's best IT cybersecurity team on the planet. It's always just about being good enough for their organization, right? So it's not what they specialize in. It's not they don't do everything at a world-class level. And I'm not saying you need to, but if that's not your business, let's say you make widgets or whatever is you're manufacturing, you'll need IT. Absolutely. And I'm not trying to engineer myself out of a job, trust me, but you need IT people. You need an IT team. You need IT security, best practices, governance, risk compliance, and all that other fun stuff. But don't bite off more than you can chew now, because you have options. You don't need to maintain a data center anymore if you don't want to. The options are there. They're secure. You just need to learn to trust the service providers. And that's the next thing we're going to talk about is, you can do it, but there's going to be a quantum shift in the way you think about it. And then I get it. In some cases, regulatory compliance or the nature of the beast just dictates you can't do it yet. But the options are there more than they've ever been. If you wanted to do that kind of thing, you could easily do that. Policy-driven approach. I'll stop on this one. It's always easier when you can have one place to go to control a policy with multiple subsections in one policy that affect lots of things. Okay, as a customer, I always love doing that. I get one place to go, and I'll give you an example. Before DLP, the data loss prevention applications that were out there figured it out. Sometimes you'd have 3 or 4 or 5 different policies, some for endpoint, some for email, some for browser-based network traffic. They're all over the place, right? You had multiple policies. It was complicated, and it was very frustrating. Now, most solutions will have one policy that you can literally go through once, say the things you want to allow and not allow, and be done. And that policy communicates to all various aspects of the product under the hood. Well, you can have a policy-driven approach for everything, and I won't bring up that slide again, that cloud with all those things in the middle, all those things and more, where a single policy can be designed to run all of them, okay? You want it to log into separate various solutions. You can go with a vendor that can provide most of those, like a Checkpoint and some of the others. They can do all that. Makes life a lot easier, more consistent, and consistency lowers risk. Not saying anything you probably haven't already thought of or heard of before. Now let's talk about some of the cons. There's no pros without cons, vice versa. So there's a learning curve. You have to learn to think differently. There's going to be a quantum shift. Like, oh, I know how I used to do it. How does that thing happen today? Okay, how's that equivalent thing? How do I get that done? It's nebulous. It's gray. It's fun. I don't even know how this works. It feels like magic to me. There's going to be a little bit of that happening, right? Like, how does it work? And is it secure? My reputation as the IT security main person in my organization, I'm going to be held accountable for this. Reliance on third-party infrastructures, the trust factor, right? So these are services. Services, by definition, mean they're coming from someone else. They're now part of your family, their ecosystem. So you have to learn to trust them to a certain degree. Good news is it's not like we started doing this yesterday, okay, as an organization. This has been going on for a long, long time. SD-WAN isn't anything new. Neither is firewall as a service and some of the other things I've mentioned. So you've got history on your side. You get time on your side. They got a lot of data that they can provide you for uptime and breaches and things of that nature. So it's not like we just started 10 years ago. The time to value for complex networks is generally a little more protracted. I tried to get a scenario for that question that was asked earlier. If you have a complex network already, you're going to have to retool it, and that's going to take a little longer. This is not a instant on-off thing for complex networks. You're still going to have the time to value. Might take 19 months, 2 years before you get it. You nail it down and you realize the value, and then you can start reaping some of the benefits, rewards, and cost savings from it. So it's like anything else. Might be disruptive. There's obviously going to be some disruption for end users' experiences as you transition over, but that's when you want to really find and latch onto a good trusted advisor, an organization that's done this before. When and wherever you can, obviously with these types of things, you want to find that source of truth or subject matter experts saying, we've done that before, learn from our mistakes, and we'll show you the way. So none of that's changed. So you can see that there are some cons. And again, Q&A, I'd love to hear maybe what you think about maybe throwing out another con. By no means do I have them all listed here. All right, I'll pause there for a minute, Tony, see and check in. Do we have any questions before I jump into?
Yes, we do. Private chat question. I just didn't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
All right, we don't. The question was, we don't have a very large IT staff. How would an organization like ours go about implementing, supporting, and managing either a SASE or zero trust infrastructure?
Great question. So this is where I get to do my shameless plug. So organizations like CBI, we are designed to address that need. That's one way. It won't be the only. I'll give you a couple here. But the easy button generally is if budgets allow and you're used to or you're okay with allowing third parties to manage parts or all of your infrastructure, they're out there, they exist. So we can manage, for example, not only the architectural design and deployment of these solutions, but then the ongoing management. Is it always up and running? If there's a problem or something breaks or needs to be fixed, you can call us. If you want to onboard and deploy more agents in the field that will allow your users to connect to the SASE infrastructure, we can actually orchestrate all that. Take all the help desk calls associated with it, and then go to the next level and say, all right, if you have a SIM that you're feeding all the security events into from your SASE infrastructure, we could be eyes on glass for you 24/7, and the list goes on and on and on. So that's one way to go, as third-party support, is the short answer to that. I'm just letting you know that CBI and others like us, we do those kind of things. The other one is if you're small enough to the point where you got, it sounds like you got a pretty small IT department, maybe less than 5 people, then what you're going to need to do is, my dad would always say, work smarter, not harder. You got to let the tools do the work for you. And there's a lot of them out there where you can set and forget to a certain degree. You're not going to, like, how often are you changing firewall rules on your firewall? Hopefully not too often. Although for large organizations, it's a weekly thing sometimes. Change requests come in all the time. But you generally start off with the easy stuff that doesn't change much. SD-WAN, firewall as a service, basic block and tackle. That's easy. Table stakes. Those things don't tend to move so much. They're more like icebergs. They move low and slow. So maybe just do a little bit, nibble off just a little tiny piece of this to make life easier for you. And then the dividends will be, you'll have less help desk calls because there's consistency, there's operational efficiencies gained. The user's bandwidth optimization is higher now because you get that with SD-WAN deployments. And so it'll be a trade-off. It'll feel busier at first, and then it'll go and swing the other way, because these things are going to buy you back some time, versus trying to maintain the on-prem legacy-based versions of these products. So it's going to be a pretty. I wish I could talk to you a little bit more afterwards. I hope we can, to kind of explore more options for you. But hopefully that helps. Not an easy answer on that one.
All right. So another, I guess, is another follow-up to the same, about some of the question. Are there proactive steps or tasks that you recommend that you can take on today for successfully implementing a SASE infrastructure?
Yes, the big one, data remember data, that's the only reason we're here. Do yourselves a favor, everybody, think about, if you haven't done it already, and do it if you're thinking about it, data risk assessment. It's going to shrink most of your problems, because at the end of the day, it's all about the data. The data gives us problems. It gives us headaches. Well, why? Because you never know where all of it is. You never know who has access to all of it or some of it. You don't know how old or aged it is. You don't know how much duplicate data is out there, how much of it is highly sensitive intellectual property, where it is, where it's been stored, where's it going. So it's all about data. So do a data risk assessment. They generally tend to be very, very cost effective. They're very low cost. We perform them for free because the dividends are just incredible. And it'll give you an x-ray of where the problems really are. Do not, and here's my disclaimer, do not jump into a SASE, zero trust, or anything like this until you know the answer to those questions to the degree where you're comfortable assuming the risk for those kind of things. Okay. Do the data risk assessment, shrink your data risk footprint, and then your problem becomes much easier to secure the data and make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong places or the wrong hands when you add SASE on top of all this stuff, because that's just going to exacerbate the problem even more than what you already have. So that's the big one, the big first one. I get that question a lot. So yeah, data risk assessment.
One more private chat question. What kind of latency overheads have you experienced while integrating with third-party infrastructure?
Latency.
I think they're probably talking about the VPN aspect of it.
Yeah, that's probably part of it. I'm thinking point-to-point VPN, latency with service provider infrastructures. That is going to be a huge myriad number of responses that I could possibly give without knowing more information about their environment. But
don't worry.
Not too many, to be quite honest. In general, if you do your homework and you do 80% prep and 20% execution, shouldn't see too many surprises. Spend a lot of extra time really validating, making sure that those are compatible environments, and beyond a shadow of a doubt what the bandwidth consumption requirements are going to be before you just connect two networks together. And that's just best practice, right? I mean, for sure. Call on an expert that can help.
So Dan, I did put your email in the chat so people can send it to you directly also. So
great. Thanks.
All right. So this one's a big one. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Because with the Colonial Pipeline, the ransomware situation, I guess it's a private chat question. How does SASE mitigate some of the increases in ransomware, malware, and breaches that we've seen in the past few years?
Yeah. So breaking down what SASE, depends on what we all believe and how these actual breaches occurred. And I'm not going to get into the whole, I'm not a conspiracy theorist guy, but you take all the stuff you're hearing with a grain of salt. The bottom line is we all agree bad guys did bad things to a critical part of our infrastructure. They brought it down, which means they got in somehow and they affected the environment in one way or multiple ways. Okay. And they stopped it from doing the thing it was designed to do. So with that general set of rules out there, SASE puts all of your infrastructure in a bubble, an encrypted, protected bubble. Not to say that your networks aren't that way now, but they're generally, if they're a mix of legacy and cloud service, and you're kind of in the middle of the process and the adoption of cloud-based services and digital transformation, you're going to have a little bit of Frankenstein going on. And I haven't seen a dam yet on the planet that works well if part of it's made out of wood and part of it's a sponge and part of it's some cement and part of it's mud. You're going to get stuff leaking through it. What SASE does is it homogenizes all of that, gives you the best, strongest wall you can possibly get that's easily manageable, and it's an encrypted bubble and an enclave that is yours from app and from file and from directory all the way back to the users. And you have complete visibility over all that. To get into a full services-based SASE adopted model with zero trust network principles deployed, and I'm saying, let's just take the perfect picture for a moment. It would be very, very, very difficult for anybody to get in and break that glass wall. But that's not going to be the case for any of us for quite a while. But you got to start edging your way towards that, because you'll have fully encrypted. The roads that are laid down are yours, no one else's, virtually anyway. The traffic from that user and their identity is validated from where they're at, wherever they're sitting on whatever device they're at, to the applications and devices and things that they're trying to connect to. It really solves it in a lot of different ways. Okay. And we got to start edging there, because it will make the bad guys' lives a lot harder for lots of different reasons. And it makes it easier, more scalable, and more affordable for us to get there too. Okay. We would all, if money was no object, I know in our hearts, we all know what to do, and we want to do the right thing. But generally, cost is what prevents us from making that dam out of one material. Okay. We just live with risk. It's just the way it is. SASE doesn't fix the entire problem, but it really puts us closer to being able to build that dam with one consistent form of material for you. Lots of different use cases. I'm actually going to talk about a few of them, but hopefully that addressed the question.
That did. Go ahead. Yeah.
Any more before I move on? I know we're
No.
coming up on, we got 3:30, so we're doing good on time.
Yeah, we're doing good on time.
Okay. All right. So let me throw out a few use cases of my own. So shadow IT. Basically, it's the concept where users going to do what users are going to do. Just to, they're not doing it maliciously in most cases. They're just trying to do things to get their job done easier because we're lazy and we love to take shortcuts. I don't like following the rules or the policies. I just want to get my job done, go home. So shadow IT kind of comes from that. It also comes from some of the malicious stuff, but generally it's people doing things that aren't sanctioned by the company or its IT teams or people. So with this, like I said, you control everything from that endpoint all the way through. If they were to try to set up a wireless network on their own or connect something to the network that doesn't belong there, it would be found out. Okay, with a well thought out architected SASE model, you're going to find that that rogue access point or that unsanctioned piece of equipment, even if it's virtual, if it's a VMware server that's brand new, someone spun up, AWS, GCP, the list goes on and on. If there's server or an asset were to exist in that environment, it's going to show itself very quickly. Why? Because you have one place to go to monitor all that activity, one set of policies, one set of security events coming in that monitor all of that. The endpoints, where they're at, how they're configured, how they're patched or not. The list goes on and on and on. All those things become extremely surface level visibility type of events when you have this type of model. You'll know more sooner than later, and it won't be a surprise for you later on when you find out that there's some shadow IT going on. The other one is users using services to store data that you would rather them not use. Like if you don't have Dropbox sanctioned or GitHub or whatever it is, they have to pass through your cloud using your SD-WAN and your firewalls and everything else. And it's going to show itself pretty quickly, okay? If they go somewhere they shouldn't go, even if it's just to report on it and not block it, but say, hey, Dan Gregory just uploaded a bunch of data to Dropbox. That'll stop that as well and give you visibility. Streamlining security operations. I talked about this a lot. I'll buy myself some time back by repeating all the concepts we talked about. It is streamlining a lot of things, central policy management, etc. Monitoring data exfiltration. You're going to have CASB in here. You're going to have DLP as a service in here. And it's all kind of like a la carte. You turn things on as you need them versus having to design it, architect it, build it, deploy it, maintain it, and everything else. It's the equivalent of turning on a switch, relatively speaking, but you'll be able to monitor where the data is going and who's exfiltrating it and where is it going, how much of it is there, and what type of data they're exfiltrating. And are you going to allow that or not? You'll have that control, fidelity. You'll have all that. Increasing network application performance. Again, we talked about this. Inherently, WAN optimization and just optimization in general from the user's experience is going to be increased dramatically because you're controlling and compressing and encrypting the network data itself, and you own it. These solutions become your internet. Okay, Checkpoint becomes your internet. Whenever they connect to the internet, whatever we're going to call that or define that, that's them connecting to your SASE infrastructure. And once they're in that universe, you control everything, including bandwidth. And so even lower bandwidth connections for remote offices, for example, that suffer traditionally from bandwidth issues, they can keep that. You don't have to pay anything more, but they'll get better bang for the buck because it comes along with WAN optimization inherently. Secure remote access to third parties. So allowing those third party suppliers, the B2B connections, to connect to this environment just as you would an employee. They'll be issued access to it or not based on their identity, who they are. Have you sanctioned it or not? Are they an approved vendor? Are they coming from a known region or a known IP, known MAC address? You can give them user ID and passwords to log into your SASE infrastructure, authenticate to it. And then once they're there, you get to control what, if anything, they can connect to and when they can connect to it and what they can connect to it with. So I only want my HVAC vendor to connect to this one computer connected to my roof unit that cools my front office. And that's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They will never do it any other time than that. And that is it, period. And it will only be sanctioned if I validate their identity with zero trust and we allow them in. So that's another good one. And then reducing the need to backhaul traffic. The necessity to backhaul traffic has emerged because we're a slave to the way networks are designed now and have been in the past for many years. We no longer have to backhaul traffic to a single pinch point from all my users and then out to the internet. And that is just going to introduce a lot of problems and latency and everything else. Why do I want to do that? Let them connect directly to the internet at whatever nearest POP that they can connect to connect to my SASE environment that I've defined. And I don't care after that. I don't need them to pass through because I still have the same visibility, the same everything that I would as if I was backhauling all that traffic. So you don't lose anything. You just gain some efficiencies. And there's many more. I'll advance to the next slide. This is it, basically, what I end on. Any more questions before I go through the last slide?
You're good.
All right. Missteps, things not to do, right? Don't use a lot of vendors. Like I said, Net Cloud and even the third parties that are going to come and help you architect and manage it possibly. Don't do that to yourselves. There are vendors out there and we can help you make those choices to kind of limit that at a price that makes sense and everything else. As long as you're getting the job done, you shouldn't care what engine's underneath the hood. I just put the key in, turn it and drive. So just don't overcomplicate the number of vendors. You don't have to. Have a regression plan. Know how to go back to where you came from when you start going down that road. That's just good planning in anything as it relates to IT security. Have that regression plan before and say, if this doesn't work at these steps, how do I get back to the previous step? Don't perform your own surgery. Don't think you can do all these things on your own. It's almost impossible because you're going to have to get services involved from other organizations that provide the SASE type of services that you're going to need. But don't do more than your experts allow you to do internally, and know when to hand the baton off to, the SMEs that can come in and help you get it done. I guarantee you the dollar you spend up front with an expert architecting it will pay off 10 times dividend on the other end when it just works the way it's supposed to the first time around. Don't forget to change that culture. People are going to act different, work different, think differently about how they get to the things that they need. And if you do it right, it'll be kind of seamless, but you need to let them know. Don't forget to tell them we're going to go a different way with our security approach, and it's going to be better for everybody. And here are the reasons why. Here's what drove this, why we're doing this. There's some cost benefits. Be transparent with them. They can handle it. Tell them everything that, within reason. And they'll get it. They'll understand it because you'll need that social currency with them when and if, invariably, some things are not going to go perfect. And you're going to need to prepare them by saying, hey, this might not be perfect. We're going to break a few eggs and make an omelet. I'm just letting you know it's going to be better on the other end. And here's why. So please tell them that. Don't do this in a bubble. And then finally, data risk footprint. Shrink it down. I already talked about data risk assessments. Shrink that footprint and make your life a lot easier. When you move from one house to another, they say there's no better time to purge a bunch of junk. So you're moving to a SASE model, throw away the garbage. It's easier to move. And that is it. I'll pull up these getting started so you can read those. And final questions and answers.
Well,
if you want to go through those.
You said something 2 slides up, 2 slides back. Keep going. Keep one right there. Does SASE allow you to get down to the IoT devices and mobile level?
Yeah, great question. Really good question. I'll start with IoT. Sorry, was that the full question, Tony? I cut you off.
That was a full question. It was okay. Someone else's messaging me and then me having the same. Go ahead. Yes.
In fact, I just had this conversation. They own 45 different dermatology and dentist offices, and they weren't the company that did that. They're the ones that bought all these practices and put them together and then provided managed services for ERP and financial stuff and whatever dermatology and dentist offices use for billing, that kind of thing. So they're a service provider, and they're adopting a SASE, zero trust network option and SD-WAN options. And there's a ton of IoT in those places, right? So it's just the first one that popped in mind because I was talking to them a couple of days ago. And what you can do, and so the short answer is going to be yes. And there's some technical stuff to it, but as in anything, the devil's in the details. You'll have a small, lightweight appliance, which is 1/10, if that, the cost of the firewall, router, switch, and all the other stuff that connects that facility, that building, to the internet. Okay, you're still going to have a physical thing. But whenever an IoT or OT device needs to or is allowed to connect to the internet, or have someone else connect to it for serviceability reasons, because it's OT, it will look and act seamlessly the same way that it used to. I'll just say it's taken care of and it's done. They've thought of that before. It's just, you got to go about thinking about it a different way. Like I said earlier, you got to think differently on these things. But the answer is yes. These models accommodate OT, IoT, mobile devices. Absolutely, they're extremely mobile device friendly. So I guess that's just short answer. We could talk more offline about the details, but yes.